Welcome to Orenda Books and Bedtime. I'm Karen Sullivan, publisher of Orenda Books, and I'm very excited to introduce you to another author reading from the comfort of their own home. Tonight we're going to be hearing from Paul E. Hardesty, reading from Absolution. A few weeks ago he read to us from Turbulent Wake, his new novel, but this one is the fourth in the Claymore Straker series. The first, The Abrupt Physics of Dying, was one of the first novels I ever published at Orenda Books. And these are incredible, beautifully written, fast-paced, in fact breakneck speed action thrillers that feature vigilante justice seeker Claymore Straker. The second in the series is called The Evolution of Fear. The third is called Reconciliation for the Dead, and Absolution is the fourth. Now the first was shortlisted for the John Creasy CWA New Blood Award. It was Telegraph Thriller of the Year. Think James Lee Burke kind of stuff. It's really literary, it's really, really beautiful. Some of the most beautiful writing I've ever heard, and it barrels along at speed. This is what some people have been saying about it. Searing, at times achieving the level of genuine poetry, says Publishers Weekly. A stormer of a thriller, vividly written, utterly topical, totally gripping, says Peter James. Overflowing with substance, says Craig Sisterson from Mystery Magazine. Non-stop action with echoes of a more moral-minded Jack Reacher or Jason Bourne, says Maxim Jakubowski. And Stab Sherez says it's trenchant but engaging. Tim Marshall, who's the author of Prisoners of Geography, says it's a fast-paced action thriller, beautifully written. And Lee Child says a solid, meaty thriller. Hardesty is a fine writer and Straker is a great lead character. This is what it's about. It's 1987 and 8 months since vigilante justice seeker Claymore Straker fled South Africa after his explosive testimony to Desmond Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In Paris, journalist Rania Latour, Claymore's former lover, comes home to find that her son and husband, a celebrated human rights lawyer, has disappeared. On an isolated island off the coast of East Africa, the family that Clay has befriended is murdered as he watches. And so begins the fourth installment in Claymore Straker series. A breakneck journey through the darkest reaches of the human soul, as Clay and Rania fight to uncover the mystery of those disappearances and murders, and find those responsible. Relentlessly pursued by those who want them dead, they must work together to uncover the truth, and to find a way to survive in a world gone mad. And now over to Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul Hardesty, and I'm just going to do a reading for you from my new novel, Absolution, which is the fourth in the Claymore Straker series. Chapter 1, Guns and Money. 26th of October, 1997. Latitude 6 degrees, 21 minutes south, longitude 39 degrees, 13 minutes east, off the coast of Zanzibar, East Africa. Claymore Straker drifted on the surface, stared down into the living architecture of the reef, and tried not to think of her. Prisms of light crazed the many-branched and plated corals, winked rainbows from the scales of fish. Edged shadows twitched across the shoals, and for a moment dusk came, muting the colors of the sea. Floating in this new darkness, a distant echo came, hard and metallic, like the first syllables of a warning. Clay shivered, felt the cold do a random walk up his spine, seep into the big muscles across his back. He listened a while, but as quickly as it had come, the sound was gone. Clay blew clear his snorkel, pulled up his mask, and looked out across the rising afternoon chop, searching the horizon. Other than the weekly supply run from Stonetown, boats here were few. It was off-season and the hotel, the only establishment on the island, was closed. He could see the long arc of the island's southern point, the terrace of the little hotel where Grace worked as a caretaker, a small dock where guests were welcome from the main island, and away on the horizon, a dark wall of heavy cloud moving fast in a freshening easterly. He treaded water, scanned the distance back towards the mainland, but all he could see were the great banks of cloud racing slantwise across the channel, and the sunlight strobing over the world in thick stochastic beams, everything transient and without reference. He'd lost track of how long he'd been here now. Long enough to fashion a sturdy mooring from or flame from a concrete block that he'd anchored carefully on the seabed, long enough to have snorkeled every part of the island's coastline to know the stark difference between the life on the protected park side and the gray sterility of the unprotected, fished-out eastern side. Sufficient time to hope that, perhaps, finally, he had disappeared. The sun came, fell warm on the wet skin of his face and shoulders and the crown of his head. He pulled on his mask, jawed the snorkel's mouthpiece, and started towards the isthmus with big overhand strokes. Months at sea had left him lean on the edge of hunger, darkened and bleached both so that the hair on his chest and arms and shorn across the bonework of his skull stood pale against his skin. For the first time in a long time, he was without pain. He felt strong. It was as if the trade winds had somehow cleansed him, helped him to heal the scars. As he rounded the isthmus, Flame came into view. She lay bow to the island's western shore, straining on her mooring. He could just see the little house where Grace lived, notched into the rock on the lee side of the point, shaded by wind-bent palms and scrub acacia. And then he heard it again. It wasn't the storm, nor was it the sound of the waves pounding the windward shore. Its rhythm was far too contained, focused in a way nature could never be, and it was getting louder. A small boat had just rounded the island's southern point and was heading towards the isthmus. The craft was sleek, sat low in the water. Spray flew from its bow, shot high from its stern. It was some kind of jet boat, unusual in these waters, and moving fast. The boat made a wide arc, steering clear of the unmarked shoals that dangered the south end of the island, and then abruptly changed course. It was heading straight for Flame. Whoever was piloting the thing knew these waters and was in a hell of a hurry. Clay floated low and still in the water and watched the boat approach. It was close enough now that he could make out the craft's line, the black stripe along the yellow hull, the long, narrow bow, the raked V of the low-swept windscreen. It was closing on Flame, coming at speed. 2 black men were aboard, one standing at the controls, the other sitting further back near the engines. The man who was piloting wore sunglasses and a red shirt with sleeves cut off at heavily muscled shoulders. The other had long dreadlocks that flew in the wind. 20 meters short of Flame, red shirt cut power. The boat slowed, rose up on its own wake and settled into the water. Dreadlock jumped up onto the bow with a line, grabbed Flame's port side mainstay, and stepped aboard. Clay's heart rate skied. He floated quiet in the water, his heart hammering inside his ribs and echoing back against the water. Dreadlock tied the boat alongside and stepped into Flame's cockpit. He leaned forward at the waist and put his ear to the hatch a moment. Then he straightened and knocked as one would on the door of an apartment or an office. He waited a while and then looked back at the man in the jet boat, hunched his shoulders. "Take a look," came Redshirt's voice, skipping along the water, the local accent clear and unmistakable. Dreadlock pushed back the hatch, Clay never kept it locked, and disappeared below deck. Perhaps they were looking for someone else. They could just be common brigands, out for whatever they could find. All of Clay's valuable, his cash and passports, were in the priest hole, his weapons too. It was very unlikely that the man would find it, so beautifully concealed and constructed was it. There was nothing else on board that could identify Clay in any way. Maybe they would just sniff around and leave. 9 months ago, he'd left Mozambique and made his way north along the African coast. Well provisioned, he'd stayed well offshore and lived off the ocean for weeks at a time, venturing into harbor towns or quiet fishing villages for water and supplies only when absolutely necessary, keeping clear of the main centers, paying cash, keeping a low profile, never staying anywhere long. He had no phone, no credit cards, and hadn't been asked to produce identification of any sort since he'd left Maputo. Then he'd come here, an isolated island off the coast of Zanzibar. He'd anchored in the little protected bay. A couple of days later, Grace had rowed out in a dinghy to greet him, her 8-year-old son Joseph at the oars, her adolescent daughter in the stern holding a basket of freshly baked bread. He decided to stay a few days. Grace offered him work doing odd jobs at the hotel, fixing a leaking pipe, repairing the planking on the dock, replacing the fuel pump on the generator. In return, she brought him meals from her kitchen, the occasional beer cold from the fridge. He stayed a week, then another. They became friends, and then, unintentionally, lovers. Nights he would sit in Flame's darkened cockpit and look out across the water at the lamplight glowing in Grace's windows, watch her shadow moving inside the house as she put her children to bed. One by one, the lights would go out, and then he'd lie under the turning stars, hoping sleep would come. After a while, he'd realized that he'd stayed too long. He'd made to leave, rowed to shore, and said goodbye. Joseph had cried. Zeus just smiled. But Grace had taken him by the hand and walked him along the beach and out to the rocky northern port of the island, where the sea spread blue and calm back towards the main island, and she'd convinced him to stay. But now Clay shivered, watching Dreadlock move about the sailboat. The first drops of rain met the water, a carpet of interfering distortions. "Hali!" shouted Red Shirt in Swahili from the jet boat. "News?" "No here," came the other man's voice from below deck. "Is it his?" said Red Shirt. "Don't know." "It looks like his." "Don't know." "No guns? No money?" "Me say it. Nothing." "Fuck. What do we do?" "We find him. Let's go." The jet boat's engines coughed to life with a cloud of black smoke. Dreadlock untied the line, jumped back aboard, and pushed off. The boat's bow dipped with his weight, then righted. Clay dived, watched from below as the craft made a wide circle around Flame, buffeting her with its wake, and then it turned for shore. It was heading straight for Grace's house.
Thanks so much, Paul. That was amazing. We'll see you next week, 8 p.m. Sunday night, for another episode of Orenda Books at Bedtime.